She said it without looking up from her phone. She said I needed to stop asking for intimacy because it was needy, not unhealthy, not wrong, just needy, like a bad habit, like clutter. I stood there with my work boots still on, grease under my nails, the smell of machine oil still following me from the elevator shafts downtown. I'd spent 12 hours making sure strangers didn't get trapped between floors, and somehow I was the fragile one. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't tell her that wanting closeness from your wife isn't a weakness. I nodded once and went quiet. That silence was the first thing I took back. I drove that night with no destination, just my Toyota Tacoma moving through empty streets, YouTube music playing low, a playlist I didn't recognize because I hadn't chosen it for anyone else. The cab felt clean in a way the house hadn't for a while. No opinions, no labels, just space. She worked in reactions, metrics, tone, the right words at the right time. I worked in margins of error and safety checks. If I missed something, people noticed fast. At home, my absence had been invisible for a long time. That night, I decided to test what would happen if I stopped compensating for that. When I got back, she was already asleep, phone face down like it mattered who might reach her next. I didn't crawl into bed. I sat at the kitchen table until morning and realized something cold and steady settle in. If closeness was a liability, then distance was an asset. A week later, she texted asking where I'd gone. I hadn't gone anywhere yet. That was the part she didn't understand. She noticed the change before she understood it. Not because I announced anything, but because patterns broke. I stopped filling the quiet. I stopped checking in. I stopped asking how her day went in that careful tone she liked to repost online as emotional intelligence. I left earlier for work and came back later, hands steady, mind already somewhere else. She tried to reinsert normal. On Thursday, she came home with bags from Trader Joe's, lining up groceries like props from a life we were still pretending to live. She lit one of her Bath and Body Works candles, the one that smelled like vanilla and intention, and waited for me to comment. I didn't. I ate standing up, barely tasting anything, and left again. The first real crack came from outside the house. A guy from her online circle started showing up more in her stories. A freelance videographer. Always available. Always validating. His comments were public, his attention clean and weightless. No history. No responsibility. Just presence. I saw it the way I see worn cables in an elevator shaft. You don't panic. You log it. You plan around it. That night, I didn't confront her. I pulled up my Google Calendar instead and blocked out my weeks with precision. Double shifts. Early inspections. No open spaces. No shared assumptions. The calendar filled fast. My life tightened into something efficient and quiet. She stood in the doorway watching me, confused by how close I was and how unreachable I'd become. She thought the distance was temporary, a mood. She didn't realize it was structural. The first betrayal wasn't physical. It was the moment she stopped seeing me as someone worth staying present for. I let that moment pass without a word, and that's when it started costing her more than she expected. By the third week, the house started feeling like a shared hallway instead of a home. We passed each other without friction, without heat. She spoke in updates, not conversations. I listened the way I listened to machinery, only for signs of failure. I stopped coming home for dinner. Between calls and inspections, I ate alone at Chick-fil-A, sitting in my truck with the engine still warm, wrappers folded neatly like evidence I didn't need. There was something grounding about eating without expectation. No table, no questions, just fuel. She adjusted at first, started sending check-in texts. Neutral ones, safe ones. I answered late, if at all, not to punish her, to retrain myself. I drove longer routes, YouTube music filling the space where explanations used to live. I wasn't angry. Anger still reaches outward. This was quieter than that. The proof came accidentally. I saw her phone light up while she was in the shower. A name I didn't recognize. A preview line that wasn't explicit, just familiar. Inside jokes. Shared rhythm. That kind of intimacy doesn't start in bed. It starts where attention is spent. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need more. The pattern was complete. That night, I moved my clothes into the spare room. No announcement. No tension. Just logistics. She noticed in the morning, standing there like she'd missed a step and was waiting for the floor to reappear. She asked if something was wrong. I told her work was busy, which was true. What I didn't say was that I'd already recalibrated. When you stop asking to be chosen, you stop negotiating your presence. And once that switch flips, it doesn't flip back just because someone starts to notice the silence. The shift wasn't dramatic. That's what made it effective. I didn't storm out or announce space. I simply stopped being available in ways she'd taken for granted. I started taking early calls, overnight inspections, routes that kept me gone until after midnight. My Google Calendar was locked tight, color-coded, efficient. There were no empty blocks left for spontaneous conversations or emotional corrections. She tried to sync with me again, asked when I'd be home, asked if we could plan something. I answered with facts, not reassurance. Times. Windows. Nothing personal. She stood in the kitchen scrolling through her phone, thumb moving faster than usual, like she was searching for traction somewhere else. One morning I didn't come back at all. I drove straight from a late call to a cheap motel on the edge of town, showered, changed, and went back out. YouTube music played the same low track on repeat as the sun came up. It felt less like disappearing and more like finally following a schedule that didn't include managing someone else's comfort. By the second day, her text shifted. Fewer questions, more confusion. She sent photos of groceries, of meals, like proof of normalcy. I saw the Trader Joe's bags in the background, staged on the counter. I didn't respond. I wasn't hiding. I was exactly where I said I'd be. I just wasn't reachable in the ways that mattered to her anymore. That was the moment she lost control of the narrative. When the silence stopped feeling like a tactic and started feeling like a wall. And walls don't argue back. The other man didn't feel like a threat at first. He felt like a symptom. A light presence that filled the gap where effort used to be required. I saw him tagged more often, his name sliding into captions, his comments staying up while others disappeared. He offered time. He offered attention. He didn't offer anything that lasted. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't need to. People like that live in open systems. They leave trails without noticing. I listened when she talked about projects, about late edits, about shoots that ran long. I matched timelines against my Google Calendar, not to catch her, but to understand the structure she'd built without me. One night, after a double shift, I ate alone at Chick-fil-A, parked under a flickering light, watching her post a story I wasn't in. I didn't feel replaced. I felt released. When someone substitutes novelty for partnership, they stop protecting the perimeter. I passed along a small piece of information to someone who needed it. Not a lie, not an accusation, just context. The kind that makes people ask follow-up questions. I never attached my name. I didn't have to. Systems correct themselves when pressure is applied in the right place. At home, she burned another Bath and Body Works candle, filling the air with sweetness that didn't touch anything real. She asked if I was upset. I said I was busy, which was still true. What fell apart around her didn't look like sabotage. It looked like gravity. And the more she reached outward for balance, the more obvious it became that I was no longer part of the equation she could manipulate. The shift became public without either of us announcing it. It happened in small rooms and quiet glances. Her sister stopped inviting us together. Friends paused before asking where I was. Someone eventually asked her if everything was okay, not because of what I did, but because of how she started answering. She showed up alone more often, talked faster, smiled too early. I heard about it secondhand, the way you hear about a system starting to fail before alarms go off. People notice when someone loses their anchor, not because they fall, but because they start overcorrecting. She tried to pull me back into view, tagged me in a memory, posted an old photo, bought groceries again, the familiar Trader Joe's bags lined up like evidence of continuity. I came home late, nodded once, and went to the spare room. No tension, no scene, just distance that didn't ask permission. At work, everything stayed clean. My routes were tighter. My Google Calendar stayed full. When you stop orbiting someone else's emotional weather, your days stop blurring together. Mine sharpened. She asked if I was seeing someone else. The question surprised her as soon as it left her mouth. It didn't land. I told her no and went back to what I was doing. The answer wasn't the point anymore. What unsettled her wasn't jealousy. It was irrelevance. I was still there, still functional, still calm. Just no longer accessible. People around her felt it too. They stopped treating the situation like a phase. That was the social hit. Not exposure. Not embarrassment. Just the quiet realization that whatever story she'd been telling about us, I wasn't playing my part anymore. Isolation doesn't arrive all at once. It settles in after the noise fades. She stopped talking about work, stopped mentioning names. The videographer disappeared from her posts without explanation, like a tab quietly closed. Whatever momentum she'd borrowed from that attention ran out faster than she expected. She stayed home more, rearranged cabinets, burned candles from Bath and Body Works down to the wick, trying to make the house feel occupied again. I moved through the same space without engaging, eating when I needed to, sleeping when my schedule allowed. We shared square footage, not a life. On my end, everything simplified. I drove between jobs with YouTube music low and steady, no lyrics pulling me backward. My calendar stayed full, locked, efficient. There was comfort in knowing exactly where I was supposed to be and not improvising around someone else's moods. She started waiting up, not to argue, just to be seen. I'd walk in, acknowledge her presence, and keep moving. That hurt her more than anger would have. Anger invites response. Calm shuts doors. She asked if I still cared. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was calculating, but because the question didn't fit anymore. Care used to mean availability. Sacrifice. Explaining myself. I'd outgrown that version. The loneliness hit her hardest when she realized there was no audience for it. Friends assumed we were handling things privately. Family followed my lead and gave space. There was no villain, no crisis to rally around. Just distance that no one could fix for her. I was still there, still steady, just no longer hers to lean on. And that kind of absence echoes longer than any argument ever could. The confrontation didn't look like a fight. It looked like hesitation. She waited until a Sunday evening, when my Google Calendar was finally clear for a few hours, and stepped into the doorway like she wasn't sure she still had permission to interrupt. She said she didn't recognize me anymore, that I felt distant, that something had shifted and she didn't know how to reach me. The words were careful, almost professional, like she was testing phrasing instead of speaking from the body. I listened without reacting, the same way I listen when a motor starts making a sound that means replacement, not repair. She asked if I was done, not with anger, with fear. I didn't explain myself. I didn't revisit old moments or defend what I'd needed back then. I told her I'd stopped asking for things that weren't freely given. I told her my life was structured now, and that structure didn't bend easily. She reached for something emotional, something shared. A memory. A habit. I stayed still. When someone has already reorganized their inner life, nostalgia doesn't land the way it used to. Later that night, I drove out again, YouTube music filling the cab with sound that didn't demand anything from me. I realized she wasn't confronting me to understand. She was confronting me to restore access. But access had closed quietly weeks ago, not as punishment, as consequence. She stood in the doorway watching the distance grow, finally understanding that I wasn't pulling away to be chased. I was already gone from the version of us she was trying to save. Her collapse didn't come with tears at first. It came with logistics failing, deadlines missed, messages unanswered. The small systems she relied on to feel competent started slipping at the same time. The videographer stopped replying. Not dramatically, just slower, then not at all. Attention is easy to give when it costs nothing. The moment it requires patience, it disappears. She tried to anchor herself in routine. Grocery runs, cleaning sprees. The Trader Joe's bag sat untouched on the counter longer than usual, like she'd forgotten why she bought any of it. She burned another candle, then another, the house thick with sweetness from Bath and Body Works that couldn't mask the quiet. I was already elsewhere. Not physically far, but internally unreachable. I ate between shifts at Chick-fil-A, watching people come and go, noticing how clean my thoughts had become. No looping, no rehearsals. My calendar told me where to be, and that was enough. She finally broke when she realized there was no role left for her in my days. Not as a partner, not even as a problem. I wasn't monitoring her spiral. I wasn't waiting for an apology or an explanation. I'd stepped into a life that didn't reference her absence at all. That's when the memories hit her, I think. The quiet ways I'd shown up. The consistency she'd mistaken for weakness. The stability she'd leaned on without naming. Those things don't register until they're gone. Her loss wasn't public. It was private and total. And by the time she understood what she'd traded away, there was no doorway left to knock on. The last moment didn't feel like closure. It felt like alignment. She stood in the kitchen early one morning while I packed my bag for another long stretch of work. No accusations. No rehearsed speech. Just a stillness that hadn't been there before. She said she finally understood what she'd done. Not in terms of mistakes, but in terms of cost. She said calling my need for closeness weak had been easier than meeting it. Easier than slowing down. Easier than choosing depth over attention. Her voice wasn't dramatic. It was empty in a way that didn't ask to be filled. I listened without interrupting, without softening. I didn't rush her, but I didn't move toward her either. When she finished, there was nothing pressing against the silence. That's how I knew it was real. I told her I believed she understood now. I also told her understanding doesn't rewind time. I'd rebuilt my days around clarity, around structure, around not asking to be wanted. That version of me wasn't temporary. She asked if there was any chance left. Not for things to go back, but for something new. I didn't answer right away. I zipped my bag. Checked the time. The truck was already warming up outside. I told her I hadn't disappeared. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. Then I left. Not angry. Not triumphant. Just intact. Some people mistake quiet for absence. They only learn the difference when the door closes without a sound. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.